we understand that counseling is required with a reverse mortgage, but really what the heck happens during that session, right? So it is with great pleasure that I'm pleased to welcome guest speaker Jen Cosentini, who is the Housing Director of Cambridge Credit Counseling Corp. Jen is also a HUD certified housing counselor and has personally counseled over 3,500 potential reverse mortgage borrowers since 2011.
All right, so I'll just take you through the agenda. I'm going to go through the intake process, the counseling session, the HUD required protocol questions that we ask, the next steps after the counseling session, and the HUD required follow-up. So our first objective when we speak to a client who calls in to schedule is just building that rapport. 99% of the clients that contact us are already working with a lender, and they're usually working off of a list of, 10 to 15 housing counseling agencies to call. So sometimes when they get to us, they are a little bit frustrated already in this first step, in the process. So we understand that, and we want to make this as easy as possible for them. So, on the initial call of the intake, we're going to set expectations, talk about how long the counseling session is going to last, usually anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on questions they have and how many people are included on the session. We're going to talk about the documents that are required. We want to make sure that they have everything that they need. We're going to let them know that we are going to go over a brief budget with them, just so they're prepared for that. Nothing major, but just basic budget info. We're going to discuss the counseling fee, so there's no surprises, and then we'll schedule the appointment. Now, every HECM counseling session starts with the initial contact with the client. When we're setting up that counseling appointment, the counselor or the intake rep, they're going to ask for a lot of information, and they need this information. Full names, of course, all owners, NBS, NBOs, because as you all probably know, if we do counseling with one borrower and then they get close to closing and find out that there are 6 NBOs on the title or the deed, now they have to go back to counseling. So we're pressing them for this information. If they know it, we're going to make sure that we get this done without having to come back, them coming back later to do it again. And sometimes they get frustrated with all this information that we have to ask for too, because they say, well, we already gave this to our loan officer, and we have to let them know that, we're not with the loan officer. So we need this information as well. And we need to make sure that they've got the HUD required documents. And this is important. We need to make sure that they have the HUDs preparing for your counseling session, the NCOAs, use your home to stay at home, the reverse mortgage comparison, the amortization schedule, and the total annual loan cost rate. And we find that sometimes loan officers or lenders aren't aware that they have to have those 3 documents in front of them for us to complete counseling. If they don't have them, we have to reschedule the appointment. If we call them and they say, oh, I never got them in time, well, we have to reschedule, unfortunately. And also, the documents, we prefer to use the lender's documents. Some counseling agencies will require that they create their own. They can do that if they want, but we prefer to use the lender's docs because, again, 99% of the clients that come to us are already working with a lender. They already have documents. They're going to be receiving them soon. So if we were to then prepare them, send them out to them, this is going to delay the counseling session. And it's also going to cause confusion because now they've got loan documents from their lender and they've got loan documents from their counselor, and they're kind of confused in our role. So we prefer to get an access code if they have it. That's great. That makes everyone's life easy. If not, we're going to request loan documents from the loan officer because HUD's HECM protocol actually states that if the client has loan documents from a lender, that the lender needs to provide those to the counseling agency. So that's why we request them. And sometimes we hear, we request the documents and the loan officer might come back and say, well, we can't talk to you and we can't send you that information. And that's not true. You absolutely can. And it's for everyone's benefit. It's definitely for the client's benefit. Now, once we actually get to the counseling session, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over the disclosures, our HUD required disclosures and our personal counseling disclosures, and we're going to make sure that the client is clear on our role in the reverse mortgage because, again, a lot of times there's confusion. They think we're working with the lender. It's part of the whole process, so we have to make sure that they understand we're neutral. We don't recommend or refer. We're going to remain impartial, and our job is strictly just to educate. So once we get through those disclosures and we hope that they are 100% clear on our role as a counseling or the counselor, then we're going to go through the counselor assistance tool. You guys may remember it as the FIT. They got rid of the FIT a few years ago, and HUD requires that we still go over the same information. So we created our own counselor assistance tool, and we call it the CAT. Basically the same as the FIT, but this is just to help the counselor assess the client's needs and help us to create the counseling session that makes sense for the actual client. And then based on the client's income level, or if they're disabled, we're required to go over a resource identity tool, also called the RIT. That is a HUD required tool. Used to be benefits checkup. That's still out there, but we are required to use this RIT instead. And it's the same concept. It's just going to find resources for the client, local, statewide, to help them save money on anything that we can possibly help them save money on. And also, I forgot to mention at the beginning of this, most everything that I'm going over today is for HECM, but it also applies to almost all jumbos as well, except for the CAT. The Counselor Assistance Tool and the RIT are not required for jumbo loans. We do not have to go over those two documents. That's an extra 20 to 30 minutes that we don't have to go through with jumbo clients. Now, the Counselor Assistance Tool, again, created to help counselors assess the client's needs and goals to customize the counseling session. And I just wanted to kind of go over what kind of questions we're going to ask. We are going to go through the basic budget, and then we're going to ask questions about the main reason that they're considering the reverse mortgage. Do they plan to stay in their home long term? You know, what are their plans for the funds? What kind of help do they have available to them? Do they have family close by? If they had an emergency, do they live alone? If they're married, does the other spouse have a pension or a life insurance policy that could help support them if the other one passed away? And these questions are going to, again, help us customize this counseling session. It's not the same for everybody. Everyone's situation is completely different, and we want to make sure that we're talking about what's important to them. And also, it's going to help us figure out other ways that we could possibly help them save money. And again, the RIT only, the resource identity tool only, we only have to go over that if it's a certain income level. And also if we know that there's something that we could help them with, even if we aren't required to go over it with them, we will go over the RIT with them to help them find some resources. Now, the counseling session itself. So you see, there's a good 30 minutes before we actually get to what we need to talk about. This is all just building up for us to customize this session for the client. And of course, we're going to go through all the things that you all probably go through with your clients as well. And we're going to break it up into chunks. First, we're going to start with the HECM basics. You know, we're going to build on that. We're just going to go over there's no repayment required, the residence requirements, growth of the loan balance, loss of equity, things like that. Then we're going to get into the loan calculations, and that's where the paperwork comes into play. So they're going to have the comparison in front of them. That's the first thing we're going to go over, and we have to go over the comparison line for line. And what we really appreciate is sometimes if loan officers have the 3 loan options there, and if they've met with them in person, or sometimes they do it online now, they can highlight what they think is best for the client, because we can't recommend or refer. We can say, well, this is what your loan officer is recommending for you, and this is why we think that is based on your situation. And we'll go over that one line for line. The interest rate, what it's made up of, mortgage insurance, closing costs, fees, all of that. And then we're going to compare the other 2 options. Now, the number 1 option, we're going to go over in complete detail. The other 2 options are going to be maybe a little bit of a brief overview, unless they really, really want to go over all 3, because that could take a lot of time. But we're going to tell them the main differences between them, and then they have to decide for themselves which one they like the best, of course. We're going to talk about payment plans, of course, how they can receive the money. And again, customized. If there's no cash out, there's no reason to go over payment plans. If it's a HECM for purchase, there's no reason to go over payment plans. Borrower obligations. Now, this is something that is probably scattered throughout the counseling session 3 to 5 times. We're going to talk about the obligations, the taxes, insurance, maintenance of the property, occupancy, things like that, consequences of default. And then we're going to talk about loan repayment. How does the loan get repaid? When does the loan get repaid? And now, while we're going through all of those different areas with the client and we're breaking it into chunks, we're also going to stop throughout and ask some questions because we are required to ask. Well, there's 10 questions and the client's required to answer at least 5 of them correctly so they can receive the counseling certificate. So maybe through the first section, we're going through the basics, then we'll start asking, so let's talk about when you have a reverse mortgage, who owns the home? So there's questions that are gonna help, just general questions to make sure they understand the topics we're discussing. And then there's other questions that are gonna help determine if the client understands the implications of the reverse mortgage. And again, we scatter these throughout because we don't want to do it as a test at the end. And we want to make sure they're with us. So when we ask them, when you have a reverse mortgage, who owns the house, whose name's on the title or the deed, this is usually the answer that we get is the bank owns our house. So this is where we want to stop and say, okay, let's go over this information one more time until they fully understand that, no, they own that house. And that's one of the biggest advantages. Another question that we're required to ask, not required, I'm sorry, because this question may not make sense for every option. Payment plans. So if someone is going to get cash out, we're going to ask them, based on all those different payment options that we went over, which one do you think best fits your needs? And this is so we know if they really understand how they can receive the funds and which one might be best for them. And also we'll talk about how can they change the plan, and if so, how much, so we know that they fully understand that. And does the money you get from a reverse mortgage ever have to be paid back? That's another question where right off the bat they say, no, it doesn't. And they're excited to answer it like they thought they got it right. And again, we'll say, okay, well, let's talk about it. Didn't we talk about loan repayment? When does the loan become due and payable? And it's, oh, okay, I remember. So again, just assessing their understanding of everything that we just discussed and going over it several times in some cases, not all cases. Now, what homeowner responsibilities will you continue to have when you get a reverse mortgage? Taxes, insurance, upkeep, that one is usually answered correctly because we go over it so many times. And what happens if the amount you owe under a reverse mortgage gets to be greater than your home is worth at that time, at the time that the loan becomes due and payable? This is to help determine if they fully understand the non-recourse limit. And this one is sometimes has to be asked in a couple different ways to make sure that they absolutely understand that even if they owe more than what the house is worth, they can still continue living there as long as they're keeping up with their obligations. So that's just an example of 5 of the questions. There are 10. And if they answer 5 correctly right off the bat, we don't have to ask any more questions. Now, what if someone doesn't answer these questions correctly, or they just can't? And it does happen. When this happens, we are required to withhold the certificate. We still have to create the certificate in FHA Connection, and then we have to withhold. And then we do give the client another opportunity to try again. We usually recommend they enlist the help friend or family member and say, okay, let's make another appointment, review the materials again, and then we'll talk to them again and ask them the questions. We'll do a quick review first and then ask the questions. And if they get the answers correctly, we can issue that counseling certificate. If not, we can't, unfortunately. And it's rare, but it's usually when we find when someone is probably, when they have dementia, things like that.
Right. Jen, do you record the recording with the customer? Does every call get recorded?
Yes,
it does.
Every call is recorded.
Great.
Mm-hmm. And that's very helpful for us, trust me.
Yes, we understand.
So after we've gone through the counseling session, we've gone through the questions, we are also required to talk about alternatives. So we're going to discuss alternatives that make sense for that client. And at this point, we already know that why the client is doing this, but we still have to say, listen, we need to discuss some alternatives maybe you haven't considered, or in case you feel like this is not the right option, have you considered moving or selling, HELOC, refi, sale, leaseback? So things like that we're gonna have to touch on. And sometimes maybe only one might possibly make sense, but we have to at least bring it up. And then we're going to go over the next steps in the process. Everything after this counseling session today is done with your loan officer or your lender. They're going to ask you for an application if they haven't already. We're going to let them know that they may be asked for a loan application fee, and that's normal. That they're going to be asked for photo ID, social security numbers, information on any debt owed on the home. So we're just going to kind of help get them prepared if they haven't been through that step yet. We're going to talk about the appraisal. I'll let them know that the lender is going to send an appraiser out to the property to assess the value and the physical condition of the home. We're going to discuss repair riders. What would happen if they needed a repair rider? Why would they need one? And how much money would be set aside? Things like that. And we're also going to discuss the possibility of a second appraisal, just so they're aware that that could randomly happen. And there's no surprises. Next steps, we're going to talk about underwriting. After the information from the appraiser gets back to the lender, all that information is going to go to underwriting, and they're ultimately going to be the one who determines your eligibility for the reverse mortgage. And then once all that information gets back and they approve the loan, they're going to call you to schedule a date for closing. Some states require an attorney to be present, so we let them know to just ask their loan officer about that. We discuss the right of rescission, and every state is different. Based on the state that they live in. Massachusetts has a 7-day cooling off period. California does. Utah does. Illinois has a 3-day cooling off period. So it's specific to the state that they live in, but we are setting them up for all of that. And we're going to let them know that we're going to be sending out their counseling certificate, and we send them 2 copies, 2 originals, and we let them know that they need to sign that and send that to their loan officer if they decide to move forward. And then
Jen,
also...
Sorry to interrupt, but what if they didn't pass their counseling and they need to be recounseled? Is there a time frame or a timeline of when they can be recounseled again?
No specific time frame, whatever works for them.
And is it usually the same full price that they paid the first go around?
We wouldn't charge. No, we would only charge for the first session. We wouldn't charge for that follow-up.
Interesting. Great. Thank you.
Maybe some agencies might, but we just don't.
You don't. Okay.
No.
Oh, so that's key, everybody. Some agencies may.
So now after all of that, then we are going to let them know that we do follow up. We're available to them post-counseling as well. And this is post-counseling, not post-closing on the loan. 6 weeks after we complete the counseling, we're going to give them a call to follow up and just check in, see how they're doing, see if they have any questions. And this is usually a good time frame for them because they're getting close to closing if they haven't closed already, and they might have some last minute questions just to run it by us and make sure everything that they're hearing from their loan officer sounds about right. And then again, we check in at 6 months when the counseling certificate expires, and that is just really to get an outcome. HUD wants outcomes. HUD wants to know how many people did you counsel, how many people received the reverse mortgage or declined the reverse mortgage. So that's why we're following up with them at 6 months, and also to let them know your certificate expires. If you haven't moved forward now, if you need us in the future, call us back, whatever the case may be.